I, probably like you, have bought, sold and missed many watches in my time. Most of those decisions please me greatly, but there's still a few that fill my soul with spiritual concrete. These, in no particular order, are the biggest regrets of my watch collecting experience so far. Actually, the last one really stings. If you saw my recent video about the worst watch brands, you'll know that I have a deep-seated indifference for Roger Dubuis. I sincerely hope that the legendary watchmaker himself, who recently passed, was placed in a coffin lined with ball bearings to make rolling in his grave easier, because what's happened to his legacy since is nothing short of tragic. He, with the help of business partner Carlos Diaz, turned traditional watchmaking not exactly on its head, but perhaps more on its side. Classical ideas with a flair of personality, like Ian McKellen in a funny hat. The La Monegasque, named probably after Roger Dubuis' target audience, took the funny walk of the Sympathy, one of Roger's most famous watches, and put it in a slick pair of leather churches, and was the last collection the man himself was here to see. There was a time-only watch, a chronograph and a tourbillon, but it was the time-only watch for me, not least because it was the slimmest and most comfortable, but chiefly because it depreciated enough for me to afford. I think the RRP was something around £12,000, but given that it sank harder than Oceangate, the remains washed ashore at something less than half that. Let me take you through the specs. It had a rounded square case in stainless steel at 42mm across by 9.5mm. That's nicely slim and not too wide given the stumpy lugs at all four corners. The caliber RD821 is an automatic movement blessed with the Geneva seal, which is to say it's very nicely decorated with schmancy details like a separate escape wheel bridge, black polished swan neck regulator, and polished jewel sinks. It's about close to a Calatrava for the price of an Oyster Perpetual. Where the La Monegasque really shines is with its shiny dial, which takes inspiration from the blackjack tables of the Monte Carlo Casino for a red, green and black display of the time. That sounds cornier than a field of corn, but the chameleon-like effect and high-quality finish used to achieve this make the watch just exceptional. It's one of those things that you don't see until someone points it out, and then you're like, oh yeah. Wearing this watch felt special. It's a special watch from a special watchmaker with a special movement, and that made me feel like I was better than everyone else. But after a time, I sold it, and I miss it a lot. I sold it because I was into this whole thing trying new stuff, and I was able to switch things around pretty easily, so I was making the most of that opportunity. In hindsight, I should have kept it. Why didn't I just buy another? They're rarer than cat feathers. Some long-term viewers may be familiar with this one, but you won't have heard the full story. When I passed my civil engineering degree and became a civil engineer to civilly engineer poop shoots and whatnot, I rewarded myself with a new-to-me Rolex Submariner 14060M. It was immaculate, it was lovely, and it was mine. This part you may have heard. What you won't have heard was that it was also the watch that changed my life. It didn't catch on a crag and stop me from plummeting to my doom or anything like that, but it did open a door that would have otherwise been shut. You see, what I didn't realise about civil engineering was that 98.4% of the time wouldn't be spent engineering. It was wasted trying to explain to a local government job's worth why I can't make water flow uphill. So I wanted out. I'd seen a job advertised for a copywriter for a local pre-owned watch retailer, but it wasn't paying enough. I did, however, enjoy writing and watches, so I had an idea. I pitched a different job instead to create a new kind of community in watches that was more fun and relaxed, with less reference numbers and more references to 80s movies and Formula 1. In my submission, I included some examples of my writing, as well as some evidence of a recent hobby I'd picked up, photography. The images were, of course, of my Submariner, and formed the basis of what would become the exploration of watches on video that have led me to today. I got that job as I'd pitched it, and so I went on to create the Watchfinder YouTube channel and its associated editorial and social media platforms. It was the watch that got me in the game, that helped me take the leap, that gave me the confidence to go at it with both feet forwards. And surprise, surprise, I sold that watch. Why did I sell that watch? Well, I'll tell you a little later on in this video, but for now, all you need to know is that I massively regret it. Not least of all because it's now 4 times the price. That's 2 examples of watches I regret selling, but how about those I regret buying? I don't know if you remember the IWC Ingenieur Mission Earth, the one they made before they forgot how pricing works, but it was a 46mm chunk of steel that could best be described as the offshore to IWC's Royal Oak. Perhaps it might surprise you that the 46mm aspect was not the part I regretted. Despite the large diameter and 15.2mm thickness, I found it to be a very comfortable wear. I had no idea what the Mission Earth business was about and made literally zero effort to find out, but it wasn't written anywhere annoying on the watch, so I didn't care about that either. As far as I was concerned, it was a modern take on a Genta original with direct lineage and a reasonable price. I got it on the rubber because I'm a tightwad. I also got it, again because tightwad, ex-display. It was a showroom model with a few hundred off because some careless schmo had put a mark on the bezel. I reassured everyone involved, including myself, that I would be able to live with such a minor blemish, and as such, money was parted ways with and the watch came with me to its new home. Yeah, I couldn't live with it. What's weird is that it's inevitable to mark a watch, and none of my watches ever stay immaculate, but with this one, I just couldn't handle it. Maybe it was because the rest was factory fresh. Maybe it's because the watch had been marked by someone else and not me. This was my territory and some other guy had splashed their scratches all up it instead. So what did I do? I obsessed over it to the point I found myself on the kitchen floor with a head torch and several grades of abrasive paper. Oh yeah, I was in deep. I was doing back alley plastic surgery on my watch and, to my absolute surprise, I did a very good job. In most lights, you couldn't even tell the mark was ever there. Most lights. By the light of an Easter moon on the most still of nights, there was still visible evidence of my interference. I tried to blend it in, and then a bit more, and a bit more still. Before I knew it, and this isn't exaggerated for your amusement, I had refinished the entire front face of the bezel, by which point I didn't like the fact it wasn't the original finish, and so every time I looked at it I wanted to drag it down a wall and launch it out the window. So I sold it to someone with less issues than me. They seemed fine with it. I'm one of those kinds of people who learns by doing, and that applies doubly so to mistakes. That is, I have to make several mistakes before I learn. So we're going to feature another selection from the worst watch brand video for a second time. This time, U-boat. It was my first mechanical watch purchase, and really what I wanted was a Panerai. But given that I couldn't afford one, and also because Sylvester Stallone had been seen wearing a U-boat, I wondered if I was getting myself into something that could actually become more desirable. Turns out, multiplying by 0 is 0. It was a 50mm Flightdeck chronograph with a Valjoux 7750, which probably explains why the 46mm IWC that came after seemed fine to me. I'd also considered the time-only Flightdeck MSG, but with the green it was a little too piquant for my tastes. That's an MSG joke. I actually wore that watch during a motorcycle crash. That kind of makes it sound like I was watching the crash happen as a bystander, but I was actually the rider of the motorcycle in that crash. Thanks to a fellow road user who didn't see you, mate, I was left with an engine fire, a broken foot, and the loss of use of my left leg for over 4 months. The U-boat I was wearing was fine, although I think it wrote his car off. Honestly, looking back, I cannot tell you what possessed me to buy that watch. I was a different person then, and a lot has changed since. But nevertheless, I have to fess up and take ownership of the fact that I, Andrew Morgan, chose to buy that watch with my own money, and not even for a bet. I didn't actually hate it at first, but I did feel self-conscious wearing it. I looked like the guy from Batteries Not Included with that thing following me around. But then as I learnt more about watches and what else was out there, I realised I had made a grave mistake. What had drawn me to it was the mechanical bits inside, and I had no idea a watch didn't need to be the size of a biscuit tin to have that. It's the watch I sold, along with another that I purchased after, to fund the Submariner. It's one of the few watches I've sold I never want to see again. In the early days of H. Moser & C's revival, they had a smart-looking watch called the Mayu. Presumably sick of Belgians asking for fries with it, the name was switched up to Endeavour, but nevertheless this sculpted case, expansive dial and chef's hat crown have endured in the collection ever since. When I first saw one, it was almost by happenstance, and I was taken aback by, in the case of the particular example I'd seen, the deep black dial, liquid gold case, tantalising movement, but most of all by the frankly startling price of around £5,000. This was used, of course, but I'm pretty sure that just the gold weight of that watch could have covered off much of that value. There was no streamliner at this point, and so the meteoric rise of Moser had not yet begun, and so presented itself a fantastic opportunity to step in on the ground floor of what was to become one of the industry's darlings. Except, like a clairvoyant passenger of the Titanic, I did not board. I did the opposite. I looked at that watch over and over again until it was gone. Today that watch has doubled and still presents good value for money, but I can't help myself but look back at the time I could have paid less than a moon watch for one. I have the watch buying intuition of two pedestrians meeting each other in the street, stepping left and right only to remain in each other's way. I'm out of sync with the universe somehow, have angered the watch gods, and am paying the price. Maybe it's because I bought that U-boat. The most painful regret I have is one that taught me a bit of a life lesson, and that lesson is to, perhaps counterintuitively, be more reckless. I like to check and check again, and then once I'm done checking, I'll check another time or three just to be sure. It makes crossing the road pretty tedious. I'm the kind of guy who uses a food thermometer on chicken nuggets just in case. I perpetually worry about the what-ifs, and to be honest, it's really held me back. FP Journe has, for around 10 years now, really taken the collector market by storm. His remontoirs and tourbillons and resonances have resonated with buyers to such an extent that he's become one of the most revered watchmakers of modern times, the likes of which I could only dream of wishing I could hope of owning. Even my subconscious can't afford to consider it. All except one watch, and I'm sure you know the one I mean. It's a little blue number that was originally conceived as the entry-level Journe, the one you're supposed to skip so you don't feel like you've skimped out on the cheapest one. Compared to the other Journes, it was simple, silly, and not worth taking seriously, and that meant prices on it didn't stay strong. The case wasn't precious metal, it was tantalum. The dial wasn't wrought from silver, but purest blue. It was as complicated as a single brick Lego kit, and that meant prices had dropped as low as £11,000. Well, I say as low as £11,000, but what I mean is that compared to what it originally cost, it was losing more money than a chain of Blockbuster. And that was my chance, my one chance to buy into this legend. Except, I didn't. To be fair to me, that was about twice as much as I'd ever spent on a watch before. But to be fair on the watch, it's now valued at 6 times as much, and at its peak, over 12 times. What I regret most is the chance I missed to have a truly show-stopping watch on my wrist. It could have been that one watch that made me feel a bit giddy about being its custodian. Most of the watches I have feel like they belong in a collection owned by someone like me. Some feel more special than others, but still appropriate to me. This could have been the outlier, the one I got away with. Oh well. Sometimes even what seems like an upgrade can deliver a fat slice of regret, and if we take a wander back to where I left the Submariner and pick up the story from there, you'll see exactly how. The Submariner, by all accounts, was a piece of crap. Tinny, flimsy, and held together with a clasp made of folded chewing gum wrapper, it pales in comparison to its next generation sibling. The first of Rolex's ceramic lineup was the GMT-Master II, gaining a new case, pumped-up dial, and of course Rolex's patented Cerachrom scratch-resistant, fade-resistant, character-resistant bezel. More is more, and so I believed the GMT, which also added a GMT hand over my previous Submariner, would make me even more happy than I already was with my Submariner. It didn't. Here's why I think that happened. First off, the GMT was chunkier, lumpier, and just generally less elegant. It also felt more modern, which sort of lost the purpose of me having it in the first place. I liked that the sub felt old and outdated. The GMT was an old-fashioned engine in a shiny new body, and it seemed at odds with the point of its existence. It was as if I'd swapped my best friend for a robot. With time, I ended up liking it a bit more, but it never really connected with me like the Submariner had. The Submariner's flaws were its character, like how to me the Saturn V command module feels like a spaceship, and the SpaceX Crew Dragon feels like a reality TV show where 3 people get tricked into thinking they've been into space. Weirdly, I do like the current generation of Submariner, but I think that's down to the reprofiled case that it's more in keeping with the original. I actually prefer the very recent Black Bay 41 in black over either the current Rolex Submariner or GMT, although of course it lacks that one word on the dial that turns the watch from timekeeper to an all-access pass into any red bar event. I was just so jaded by the GMT by the time I got rid of it that I actually swapped it out for a Panerai. Think of it as a horological midlife crisis. I didn't keep that either, but at least it made me feel something. Queasy is still a feeling, isn't it? Do you remember the big recession of 2008? Yeah, so I'd literally just bought a house like the year before. The value tanked, and just before they shrank to almost nothing, mortgage rates shot up, and thanks to absolutely rotten timing with my mortgage product, I basically couldn't afford my home anymore. I took out a crappy loan to cover the difference, sold the house, and made do for a bit. Emerging out the other side, watch collection nothing more than a memory, I thought it was about time to treat myself to something new. The loan was cleared, things were looking positive again, and I was about ready to do something more than eat beans and sit at home counting the threads in my carpet. So I purchased a very well made and affordable watch with great styling and a rapturous following, the Longines Legend Diver. It was all things to all people, certainly before the introduction of the Black Bay 58, and it could do no wrong. Well, almost, because whilst it was as good looking as Ted Bundy, it also, like Ted Bundy, had a bit of a character flaw too. As per the 1960s original, it was built just like a Greek statue wasn't, delicately proportioned in the torso and massively over-endowed in its protrusions. The lugs on this watch could have made an old lady blush, and with typical blinkered consideration, I chose to ignore that at purchase. Rather than to say the watch grew on me, it seems it was the lugs that did the growing. Every day they seemed a micron longer, as though I'd switched my bedside table where it lived overnight for a tray of Miracle Grow. All in all, I came to the conclusion that the critics were right, and that I was not built for a watch with lugs so long I had to swat away helicopters looking for a place to land. Turns out I wasn't the only one, and since then Longines have restyled the watch to bring those lugs back into proportion, but I'm afraid the damage might already be done. Tudor has since come along and hoovered up every last straggler in the affordable dive watch market, and so the value appeal of the Legend Diver just isn't what it used to be. Speaking of Tudor, could it be that the safest choice, the Tudor Black Bay 58, is a regret on my purchase list? It is, but maybe not for the reason you might think. The Black Bay 58, commonly known as the best, least interesting watch there is, was built for people exactly like me who are as timid as a hedgehog on an airship. It's small, so it won't draw attention. It's slim, so it can be easily hidden beneath a sleeve. It's matte finished, so it won't catch the light and throw a stray beam into your, or worse, someone else's, eye. There's no date, so no risk of missing a birthday. And it's relatively affordable, so you're less likely to get your skull split in two for it. As someone who prefers to become part of the scenery, I value all of these traits, and yet it took me 5 years from release to purchase to add this watch into my collection. What took me so long? I'll refer you back to the Chronometre Bleu. When I say I'm risk averse, I mean I'm risk averse. I'd made so many mistakes buying watches that I sat on the Black Bay 58 for half a decade before committing. And that's 5 years I didn't get to enjoy it, because as it turns out, it's as great as I'd hoped. And not that I'm counting, but it's also 5 years of price increases that I've had to swallow too. Okay, so it's not a desperate amount, but it's enough to think about every time I look at it. I like to think I countered that by getting the strap version instead of the bracelet, but that's some man maths even I don't believe. Still, I have it now, so there's that at least. I wonder what regrettable watch I'll trade it in for. Okay, so my favourite Rolex of all time and forever is the Yacht-Master, specifically the rose gold in 40mm with the black ceramic bezel and rubber strap. I'm not calling it Oyster Flex because that sounds like an exercise tool that helps new mothers regain control of their bladders. Before the Yacht-Master took its turn to blow up, it was one of the least liked watches in the entire Rolex lineup. Not the least liked. That accolade goes to the absolute hate crime that is the Yacht-Master II, which is now being discontinued and will be missed by nobody, but certainly one of the least liked. So the story goes, Rolex had planned to use the Yacht-Master's streamlined form to luxuriate, that's a real word, the Submariner, but then they remembered they liked making money and changed their minds. In an alternate reality where they went ahead with it, Rolex is now to be found in the clearance basket at 7-Eleven, alongside the revived Furby and out-of-date Ham. For whatever reason, maybe I was dropped on my head as a child and then several more times as an adult, I really loved the Yacht-Master, and so back when it was cheap, I pounced on the chance to get a platinum-dialed, platinum-bezeled 16622 with the glittery finish and red accents. Not only did I absolutely adore that watch, I also wore it during a couple of key moments in my life, namely my wedding and my honeymoon. I have a picture of it on my wrist overlooking the Fairmont hairpin at the Monaco Grand Prix. Actually, Charlotte and I found a loophole where we could stay at the Fairmont on the Wednesday night for £200 and stay as long as possible for the Thursday practice. They tried to upgrade us to a sea view because the hairpin rooms were set up for expensive hospitality, and so we told them they were ruining our honeymoon, and they eventually gave in. So yeah, I sold that watch too. I was young, dumb, and full of completely stupid ideas of trying lots of different watches. So I don't have that watch anymore, and that's the one I really, really regret. Someone, somewhere, is wearing the watch I got married in, and not me. Here's a premonition on my next regret. I deeply want a Daytona, and new is as likely as me winning the lottery, which I don't play. It's horribly expensive used, but I'm pretty sure it's only going to get worse from now on. Do I do it and pray to the watch gods that they'll forgive my U-boat sins and look after me? Or do I hold back and wait until it's even more expensive? Let me know that and your own regrets down in the comments below. And thank you to my ever-supportive Patreons, who you can join in the description. Thanks for watching, and remember, if in doubt, you can always get extra money by raiding the Kids College Fund. A degree will be worthless by then anyway. Goodbye.